Welcome, everyone, to week 3 of the college football season. We're going to preview that this week. Thank you for tuning in back at Big Bookie, presented by Big Banter Sports. You know, we are the home for all of Big Ten sports. We have a podcast for every single team in the Big Ten. So if you are a fan of any team within the Big Ten, or you're just a fan of football in the Big Ten, Big Banter is the spot for you. And we're back for week 3. But first, we got to get into week 2. How did we do? How did our picks look? And what we're excited about. So I'll start it off this week just talking about what we saw. Actually, no. We're going to give it to our CEO. We're going to see what he has to say about his pick from last week because it was the talk of the show.
Everyone's been shitting on it, and I guess maybe I picked wrong. I let Sonny from the Illini cast influence me. He had way too much influence under that decision to ride with the Fighting Illini on the road in Lawrence against Kansas. I thought the defense could get it done, but Jalen Daniels thought otherwise, and I was wrong. Fade me at all costs. Don't even listen to what I have to say because it doesn't matter.
Well, we are very excited to have you back on Big Bookie. We love when the CEO can drop in and give us his picks. But last week was probably smart to avoid the spotlight because I heard a lot of people were fading that and they did not look that well. So we're gonna blame Sonny. We're not gonna turn it on our CEO. We're gonna look at Sonny from our Illini cast. It's all on you. We're gonna hear from you this week. Hopefully, he has some stuff on his podcast to talk about. So you guys should go check it out. But Chris, I wanted to hear how you thought last week went. What was your pick, and what was the outcome?
Yeah, so I think some highs and lows for the podcast. I think last week we ended talking about we're not going to see 10 and O's this week on money lines. We're going to have some more difficult picks. So bad, my pick of the week, Iowa State. That was frustrating, and the fact that that game went entirely how I thought it would. McNamara struggled. He had an interception, couldn't throw a touchdown, but they got out to an early lead, were able to run the ball really well, and they eked out a cover over Iowa State. Iowa State ended up losing by 7 on a 4-point spread and really struggled at the quarterback position. I did talk about not thinking there would be a lot of regression there, and it was frustrating seeing their offense struggle to put up points. But, you take some and you lose some. Positives, I think, hit Kansas, which was awesome. So I was excited about that. And then all of us went winning record on our pick'em spreads, which I think any week we can go in against the spread and all of us go above 500, really strong week. So I was excited to see that out of Kansas. That was another big pick of mine. And then Purdue as well on the road. I know I talked about them as a faller the week before, was really interested to see, okay, how does this defense rebound? They go into Virginia Tech in a game that got postponed for a while and a delay. And I believe Hudson Card was our player of the week for Big Banter. So he really went out there, played very well, had a strong performance. I think that's a huge rebound for a team like that. So pretty solid on the full slate for bets, but struggled having the pick of the week not hit. So excited to try to recap on that this week.
Yep, I'm right there with you. Had the Wisconsin -6. They did not look like the same team in week 1. I don't know what Luke Fickle's doing. Not sure what's going on with their offense. I know they have Tanner Mordecai. I know he was talented at SMU. But when you have one of the top backfields in the Big Ten, you got to utilize it. And only getting 29 carries, 10 of which came from Tanner Mordecai, and only 7 went to Braylon Allen. So just an underwhelming offensive performance coming out of there. I thought just seeing what we saw in week 1, just ground and pound, going back to what I think a lot of people are used to with Wisconsin is just they run between the blockers. They have a great offensive line, and they're going to be a formidable opponent in the trenches. I think they kind of shied away from it. I don't know if it was Luke Fickle or what's going on there, but it really just wasn't the same team as week 1. But I'm hoping this week they'll get back to where they were week 1. They really establish the offense, establish the run game, and they can really show what their true potential was, because I think we got to see a glimpse of it week 1, and then it kind of regressed week 2. So we'll have to keep an eye on them throughout the season. But I did get the Iowa pick money line. It was exactly like you said, just a hard-nosed football game. It was close throughout. I never really felt confident that they were just going to pull away or anything like that, but they were able to squeak it out. So we did go 500 on the week. But yeah, like I said, like you said, the pick'ems at the end of the show, I think, really showed just how diverse this Big Ten slate is. You have really tough matchups out of conference, and then you have some I would say Power Five group of five teams that you're like FCS teams that you're facing, but it's all about that spread. Can your team put up the points? And I think we fell victim to a little bias with our Big Ten. We'll preview it at the end of the show, but I do think just being able to everyone go above 500 across the spread was really talented this week. So it was overall, I thought we did pretty well. It was a great set of games. I don't think we have as highly touted matchups this week. Obviously, we were gifted some really good games week 1 and week 2. So I think we're starting to get into the real slate of games, and it's really going to be interesting to see who continues to rise and who continues to fall. So with that, we can kind of get into our next segment, which is the biggest risers and fallers. So Chris, we can start with you. Who was your biggest riser of the week?
Yeah, so I had two, and I think, last week was a really dull week for the Big Ten with a lot of teams like in the FCS. We saw some Big Ten teams lose in non-Power 5 games. My two biggest risers, though, Purdue, as I mentioned before, being able to win at Virginia Tech was big for the conference, especially with how the ACC's looked so far. Being able to beat an ACC opponent that conference has looked good, and it was encouraging to see them kind of control the majority of that game, even with it being postponed. So Purdue really being able to bounce back, defense looked better, feel a lot more confident in them moving forward, and what looks like a wide open Big Ten West. I think Iowa has not impressed me so far. I don't trust their offense to be able to win a ton of games in that conference. And Wisconsin just didn't look very good. So I think, that side of the conference is really wide open. I'd like to see, is Purdue able to take advantage of that, put the Fresno loss behind them, keep moving forward. Other big riser, I would say Northwestern. I was not a team probably many people watched, but I was impressed with the fact they were underdogs against UTEP out of all teams. And I think whenever we see a Big Ten team be an underdog against UTEP, that's alarming. And for them to go and win handily is big for the Big Ten. It's big for Northwestern to be able to establish with their new coach a win under the regime and hopefully be able to put together some sort of season. I think those players are facing a lot of adversity, having lost Fitzgerald, and being able to get a win under the belt and see if they can kind of build on that at all this season and not be a 1-11 team or a winless team, being able to just get that first one down, see if it could be something that maybe later on in the season we're talking about, Northwestern maybe being able to cover some spreads and even win some games. So that was a big riser for me. Biggest faller I felt was Nebraska. They were a team that were 3-point underdogs. They were going into Colorado. We knew it'd be a hostile environment. We knew it'd be the most popular game of the week. And Colorado didn't play well. They really didn't play to their strengths offensively in the first half, not being able to score for a while. They really didn't play a very clean game, but it was more so Nebraska just turning the ball over a lot and really struggling, specifically at the quarterback position. I think they really managed to let that game get out of hand in a game where Colorado didn't really ever look excellent or ever look like a top tier team that was much better than Nebraska, but just Nebraska couldn't seem to keep the ball in their hands. I'd be very concerned. I know we've been talking about the Rule 8 on this show in Nebraska, and that starting off 0-2 for me is alarming. That would be a big red flag and something that they need to get turned around fast. And with who's currently in their quarterback room with Sims and Purdy, I don't know if that's going to get turned around. I think they're really going to struggle offensively, and we'll see if they can rebound on that this coming week.
Yeah, their week 1 loss was tough. It was a tough loss to Minnesota. I mean, the catch to tie the game was incredible. I forget his name, but for Minnesota, it was an awesome play to watch live. And just to go down and lose that on a field goal, and then just to come back, like you said, all the hopes were high. You had a lot of America, honestly, on your side. They were drinking that Rule 8, and it was underwhelming, honestly. But Brant, we can turn it to you. Who was your riser of the week?
Well, actually, since we're on the topic of Nebraska, I'll start with my faller because
Perfect.
I went more player specific rather than team specific with my risers and fallers this week. My faller is a guy that has already been mentioned by Chris. It's Jeff Sims, and he's going to be my faller until he falls off the depth chart. I just don't see him getting it done. And there have actually been rumblings all over Nebraska Twitter that it's actually a guy you didn't mention, Henrik Harburg, some like dude they just plucked straight off the Nazis and put him in the lineup. But he's been playing like a tight end H-back type of role for them, but he's also their second, third string quarterback. Sims has been banged up this week at practice, and he's been getting the reps at quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see if Harburg kind of slots in there and takes the job from Jeff Sims, who, as I mentioned, he's going to be slotted into that faller spot until he proves otherwise.
That'll be a wide open competition. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he really just has not played up to expectations. I had pretty high hopes for him after he played. He played for 2-3 seasons at Georgia Tech, and I mean, Georgia Tech was by no means a great team, but he ran the triple option decently well. Obviously a step forward playing in the Big Ten. We don't run the triple option here. He's learned that the hard way through the first 2 weeks. So yeah, that's my faller. Go into risers. I hate doing this, but it's really hard to say that anyone other than JJ McCarthy is a riser through the first 2 weeks. And I know he's played the most cake competition, and I really hope that someone just steps up and gives it to him. But so far, he's played nearly perfect he's playing against like the Michigan College of the Blind, but he's out here going 48 for 55, 558 yards, 5 touchdowns, no picks. He really could not be playing or putting up more perfect stats. He's probably right on the cusp of the Heisman conversation. If he keeps putting these numbers up against good opponents, he will be in that Heisman conversation. And with how deep this quarterback draft class is, he could easily play himself into the first round, which is going to be really interesting to watch the quarterback stocks throughout the season for NFL purposes.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off of you, Brant, with your riser. I'm just going to take Michigan. I know they're highly touted. They're ranked second, they're ranked second in the nation. This shouldn't come as a surprise, but I think although they haven't played anyone, they've just looked very complete and to the part. I would say it's not the same story in Ohio, out of Ohio State. I think just seeing the differences in how they played, and I know Kyle McCord and Devin Brown, and there's a quarterback situation which we touched on last week, and that Kyle McCord was officially named full-time starter this week. But I just think the poise at which they've handled these games, it's been without their head coach, Jim Harbaugh. I do think it was a little cheesy, their little tribute that they did for Jim Harbaugh game 1, which we did not talk about. That is Bush League. But they delivered the product. They are on the field one of the top teams in the country, and there's nothing you can argue about that. I think they are playing a brand of ball that works for them, and it's showing that they can put up points in their defense. Although they haven't faced anyone, it was very good last year. And although they did lose a lot of key players, I think they'll be able to reload to an extent, and I think they're still going to be a formidable opponent. Now to the faller, it might be preemptive, but I'm gonna piggyback a little bit with my faller, and just the Nebraska team. We've all touched on it. I don't know what we thought was different this season, whether it was new coaching, new what. Like, it's the same old Nebraska. Although the conference was not as strong top to bottom per se, I just still think the way that they came out these first 2 weeks, they let game 1 slip away, and then game 2 just an abysmal performance on offense and defense. It's just not something that you're going to win with in the Big Ten, and I'm honestly not sure how many games they're going to win this year. It's going to be an interesting stretch for them, and the Big Ten is no easy feat. So if they pull a Wisconsin this year, I would not, or not a Wisconsin, a Northwestern, I would not be surprised if they only win 1 game this year, just because there's so much top to bottom of just tenacity in the Big Ten. I don't think any game you can walk in and say, oh, this is a cakewalk. Even Rutgers. Rutgers is 2-0 this year. Like, I think every single person that has talked about Rutgers and the conference leader alignments and da-da-da-da, they always talk about going to Piscataway, New Jersey to play Rutgers. And now they're playing up to that part. They're actually winning games. They look like a good football team. They're putting product on the field, but
I mean, let's pump the
they've
brakes.
only played a few
Let's
games.
pump the
But
brakes real quick. Imagine Oregon going up to Piscataway, New Jersey.
see what I'm saying? You're
It's a
just as
joke.
bad as
It's a
the
joke.
national media. You're just as bad as them.
I agree with
Everyone
Taylor
wants to
on that.
dog on
Yeah.
Rutgers, and this is the year that they're actually like, hey, we're still going to win games. We're going to be, I think they could honestly be bowl eligible, which is not that crazy
I do
in this
think
day and
bowl
age of football,
eligibility
but
is in reach. I do think it's in reach for them.
yeah,
It really comes down to this week. If they can beat Virginia Tech, they're making a bowl game.
Which is
If
a
they
huge-
can't, they may fall to 5-7 and miss that bowl eligibility. This is a huge, huge week for Rutgers.
this is a big week, and we'll see that in the picks.
Yeah,
coming up-
and
coming up here.
what's glaring with Rutgers too, just to touch on that as well, is
Mhm.
so well coached. I think having Chiano there, who's established himself in the Big Ten, is coached well. Like it's a different program than it has been in the past, and really they aren't what I think's the same old Rutgers. I do think that's a team that can contend in bowls and kind of like bring some of these Big Ten teams in some tougher battles than they might expect, and that's what we've not gotten from Nebraska. And I think if we would have looked back 10 years ago or 15 years ago when these teams joined the conference, I think there was a lot of hype over Nebraska and a lot of confusion over maybe Maryland and Rutgers. And again, this year, I think we're starting to see that Maryland is consistently a middle tier Big Ten team that's kind of able to beat some teams. And we're starting to see that out of Rutgers too. So it's exciting to see from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But let's give the fans a little preview into week 3. Where do we want to lead them? What do they want them to bet on? So, Brant, we can start with you. Do you have any pure dogs, just straight underdogs of the week? If not, we want to hear your play of the week.
Well, I did mention at the start of the show, I don't like making my plays this early, but there is one pure dog I'm eyeing, and I'm hawking around him, circling around him in the sky, ready to dive in and just toss all my money. But I'm not doing it yet, so don't tail me yet. Wait till you actually see me do it. But the Minnesota Golden Gophers on the road at Chapel Hill are a team I'm keeping my eyes close on. And a big reason there is the defense. It has looked very, very good through the first few weeks. Tyler Nubin is a difference maker at safety. Drake May better watch out for him. He's going to be after the ball all night long. You got some dogs at linebacker. You got some good some decent pass rushing. I won't say some good pass rushing, but it's not half bad. And the cornerback play, Justin Wally is another guy to keep your eyes on. Minnesota just has a good secondary. It's going to be tough for Drake May to carve him up. He's looked, he's had his flashes. He looks like at times like the guy who is projected to go second in the NFL draft, but he's far from the perfect product. We saw him go have that super close game with App State last week. There's no reason Minnesota's not going to come into Chapel Hill and play him closely.
Yeah, I love that. I think Jordan Whitehead on Monday gave his best Tyler Nubin impression, getting those 3 picks off of Josh Allen. I think Nubin was sensational in that first week matchup against Nebraska. He was all over the field, and he just disrupting everything. So love that pick. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, so tailing off that a little bit, I do agree on Minnesota. I might not get as aggressive on the money line, but I do like the points there. That's a spread too, where 77% of the public is on North Carolina. The spread started at 6 points. It's now up to 7.5. And anyone out there that bets knows that 7's kind of a magic number. And once you get that extra half point over 7, and now they got to beat them by more than a touchdown. I'm not sure they're going to do that against a Minnesota defense that's pretty strong. So I do really like that pick. My pick of the week is Washington, 16-point spread. I think this is a horrendous matchup for Michigan State. They have a very poor secondary. They're a team that I think plays much better from ahead than they would from behind, just in the fact that we really don't know what Kim is at quarterback. I think he struggled more than the stats would suggest. Just kind of watching the first half of that Central Michigan game, especially, he struggled and kind of turned it on towards the end. But I cannot think of a worse matchup for a team that really struggled secondary wise. They allowed 400 yards to Penix last year. Penix coming in here again, he's a top 3 to 5 quarterback in the nation. Guy's got an NFL arm. They returned most of their receivers and starters, and they beat up on this team last year. And then not to mention as well, all of the drama and controversy surrounding Mel Tucker. I think you don't have your coach there now. You have to wonder where Michigan State's players' heads are at. There's a rule in college football of, if Tucker were to get fired, they are able to have a free transfer within 30 days. And I believe that a lot of these players are probably sitting trying to figure out, is this a program I want to stay at if Tucker's not the guy there? So all of this off-field controversy, you're now facing a top 10 team that's lit it up the first 2 weeks. Penix has had 430 yards per game and 8 touchdowns. And not to mention Michigan State's 2 biggest offensive weapons from last year. Jalen Reed got drafted in the NFL, and Keon Coleman, we've all seen what he can do at Florida State, is not there anymore. So I don't know how this team's going to be able to play from behind in a game where they are going to have to chase points. I think Penix really is legit. I think he's a very different quarterback than he was when he was in the Big Ten at Indiana. And this team's going to go in there and really beat up on Michigan State. I think the spread is surprising at 16. I believe the fact that Michigan State's home, they're getting more credit for than maybe what type of team we're going to see rolled out there, just not knowing where their heads are really at with even playing a game on Saturday. So that'd be my bet of the week.
Yeah, I think you touched on it perfectly, just all the turmoil that's going on up at East Lansing and the effect that the transfer portal and the draft had on them. I think it was evident week 1 when you saw what Florida State was able to do with the same exact talent that they had last year at wide receiver. But yeah, I agree that Michael Penix has been putting on a show week in and week out. So I'm excited to see if Michigan State has anything that can stop him, because like you said, I don't think they really do, and there's a lot of question marks around that team. But my bet of the week, you guys kind of touched on it earlier. I'm going to take Rutgers at home against Virginia Tech. You guys mentioned it's one of the biggest games of the year. I've been high on the Rutgers. I don't know why. Just week 1, love their spread. They've looked good the first 2 weeks. I think they're just a well-coached team, like Chris mentioned, with Shiano there. And it being at home, you don't have to deal with Enter Sandman, which I think is one of the best college football entrances in the entire nation. It is amazing, and it was awesome to see last week, even though we did have that big delay. But you saw Purdue was able to go in there and beat them. I don't think Rutgers and Purdue are on the same level. I think Purdue is a much better team at quarterback and a lot of the skill positions, but I think just the coaching that goes in at Rutgers, I will not take the spread because they are -7 favored right now. But I will take them money line. I think that they'll be able to get the job done, and this is the year that they're going to make a bowl and really start making some noise in the middle of the Big Ten, not the top yet. They've got a long way to go. But now we get into everybody's favorite segment of the week, our pick'ems for the week. So I will give you the overall spread of last week. So coming out on top, it is Chris and I, 8-4 across the spread. Brant and Brandon not far behind at 7-5. And then taking the money line, only missing 1 game, myself, 11-1, followed by Chris at 10-2, and then of course Brandon not far behind, 9-3. So overall, very good weeks. I don't think the slated games will be necessarily as hard on the money line this week per se, but I think we got a lot of interesting spreads. I will say one spread that I'm absolutely hammering after last week, which may not be a favorite amongst people, but it's the Ohio State -29. I think last week they had maybe a 49 or 39. It was a very large line, and they didn't cover.
4.5 at close.
Yeah,
44.5. Yeah.
44.5, which is just insane. But you see that when you're playing any inferior Group of 5 or FCS team. But seeing it at under 30 and knowing that they're going to have their QB1 at the helm, I think their offense will really start to open up here. And I think they need it. I think this game is crucial for them to have any chance against Notre Dame, because if their offense isn't clicking, I think the defense is very good, but I don't think it can really go toe to toe with an offense that just isn't there and unproven. So I think this week I'm going to hammer that minus 29, and I think they're going to get the job done going into South Bend next weekend.
I love that pick. I actually had that one circled as well. Interesting stat on that. Western Kentucky, only 2 teams allowed more rush yards than those guys. So really poor rush defense. These OSU running backs have not been unleashed yet. I feel like they've not really hit their full potential. And these guys as well are fighting for jobs at who's going to be getting the most carries between Mayan, Henderson, Chip Trainum. I'm excited to see some of these guys establish themselves this week in a team that has a poor rush defense. And Ryan Day all but about said last week in his press conference after the game that they need the cover. He came out and said that it was a lot of inefficiency in the fact that they're used to playing Youngstown and scoring 60, 70 points, and they're not currently do that. And although he blamed it a little bit on the new first down rule, which seems
I did hear that.
I do believe Ryan Day is going to go out there and try to run up this score. He knows this Notre Dame game coming up is a huge one. We need to see what McCord can do throwing the ball downfield. I really like that spread as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. We haven't seen Ohio State cover a spread this whole season, and Western Kentucky is far and away the best offense that we've seen so far. Their air raid is actually really dangerous. You got a guy in Austin Reed who just threw for tons of yards last year, coming back and doing it again. They've got an NFL receiver in Malachi Corley. They've got Blue Smith, a former Ohio State and Cincinnati transfer. He's been catching some balls out there. So they like to spread the ball out. Malachi Corley is actually like 5th or 6th in receiving yards on the team right now, surprisingly, and he was touted as like a first round talent. So they haven't even really unleashed him yet, maybe saving him for this game specifically. But yeah, Western Kentucky, they've kind of beat the crap out of their last 2 opponents. I think they could keep it closer than 4 touchdowns. I think maybe it's a 3 touchdown game. And Ohio State hasn't covered, like I mentioned, a spread this year. And I know, Chris, that was to your point. Ryan Day kind of says, hey, we need to get this offense humming. But I don't know. I don't know if this week's the week that they do it.
I love it. Before we go, we didn't mention one inter-conference matchup. So we have Penn State at Illinois. Penn State is favored 14.5. Just want to hear you guys' thoughts. Who's going to take it just quick before we sign off?
Yeah, I got an interesting pivot on that. I think that 89% of the public is on Penn State. I do believe Penn State wins this game, but with it being that public, I'm a little bit hesitant. My favorite play in that game is the over 48.5. This Illini defense last year allowed 24 points only once. And so far this season, we've seen them allow 28 points, more than 28 points twice. I believe Drew Lallar goes out there, really establishes himself in his first Big Ten game and goes out and scores points. And I think Altmaier plays well. I think the Illini, towards the end of that game against Kansas, kind of got the offense going a little bit more. And 48.5 doesn't feel like a ton of points. I feel like in a game with a weird 14.5 point spread, it's kind of hovering around there where Penn State's going to have to win by 3 scores. Give me the over of 48.
Okay, I like it. As a guy who had the under in the Kansas Illinois game last week and just got my hopes and dreams shattered by that horrible Illinois defense, also by having the money line to just double down on breaking my heart. I think that's probably a good bet on Drew Aller kind of shredding those guys to bits and pieces. But that 14.5 point spread it's definitely playing mind games with me. Going into the season, I thought Illinois had a chance to even potentially upset Penn State, but they've looked every bit as good as I thought they potentially could coming into the season. It's going to be tough for them to go on the road and into that environment. That is, if Illinois fans show up. I'm not really sure if they've given up on their team. I know a lot of them are pretty distraught right now. But they'll be there. It's the Big Ten season opener. I'm going to have to lean Illinois right now. Plus 14.5. I think they'll probably be able to keep it close, but I mean, Penn State's just so talented at every level. I wouldn't be surprised to see them pull away with it either. So definitely not going to hammer it yet.
Yeah, like you both mentioned, the half a point is really giving me a hard time. I think it's going to be like a two-score game. I think like you saw, kind of, it's not the same, but with Ohio State, Indiana, it wasn't this routing blowout. It was pretty defensively heavy, and I just think that's how Big Ten kind of football is. So, but although just Penn State, they have weapons. We've seen it the first 2 weeks, and I think they're just a very talented team, top to bottom. So I think I'm gonna stay unless the spread moves. I'm just gonna stay away from that. But I do love the over 48.5. I think that's probably the best pick that we could have on this game right now.
Love it. One more
Uh,
pick, because I know
Yep.
he's here. Brandon
Mhm.
did send me his pick of the week. He couldn't join us. Brandon is all over Purdue this week on the money line. This is a bet that 89% of the public is on Syracuse, a whopping number. Purdue actually opened up as 3-point favorites. They can now be found as almost 2.5-point, 3-point dogs. Syracuse lost 6 of their last 7 games last year. They lost Sean Tucker. I'm not sure what the hype is on Syracuse going into this week or why they're getting so much public attention, especially after a dominant Purdue victory. But I know Brandon loves the idea of them going into Purdue and Purdue establishing themselves at home, redeeming themselves over Fresno. So that is his pick of the week, just so everyone knows.
I think
Amazing.
I'll be
Amazing.
tailing right there.
Yes.
I don't see any way that Syracuse goes in and beats Purdue, honestly.
Yeah, that was a great pick to end the show. Everybody, hammer Brandon's pick. We're all going to be tailing that. But thank you guys for joining. This was a great show, and we'll be back for week 4.